Hello, my name is Anika Bukapatnam, and welcome to the fifth episode of 15 Questions with the Feminists. What is your name, and what is your role in the menstrual movement?
How you doing? My name is Ameer Abdul. I am the National Campaign Manager at Period, which is a nonprofit organization working to end period poverty through service, education, and advocacy.
And when did you first get involved in the menstrual activism space?
I first got involved in the menstrual equity movement back in the end of 2017, early 2018, when myself and a colleague of mine had began a period chapter at The Ohio State University. So that was my introduction to the movement, to the issue of period poverty, and I've been here since.
And may I ask, what was the biggest challenge you have faced in this space so far?
The biggest challenge I've faced in this space so far is getting through the stigma around talking about periods. So I strongly believe that the reason, or one of the top reasons, that period poverty is still an issue, still a crisis, not only in this country, but around the world, is due to the stigma of talking about menstruation and talking about periods in general. If we're not able to speak about an issue, then we're not going to be able to speak about the solution. And so the number one way in combating period poverty, in my mind, is first breaking that stigma so we can have the conversation about this issue. And so that has been one of the biggest barriers to solving the problem.
Thank you. And you mentioned you worked with Period, so would you be able to describe your day-to-day as a policy coordinator for Period?
Yeah, so as national campaign manager, my day-to-day looks a lot like responding to emails. There's a lot of work that is being done on the back end in order to make sure that we can present things to folks and really make a change. Making a change and really combating an issue and trying to really end this issue of period poverty isn't always doing the fun work of maybe organizing a rally if you're into that type of thing, or having conversations with classmates and with people in your community. A lot of it comes down to spreadsheets. It comes down to responding to tons and tons and hundreds of emails. It comes down to making one pagers about different pieces of legislation. And so if you look at it, really, if you look at my day to day, people might say that it's pretty boring, honestly. But I don't see it that way, mainly because I have a strong understanding in the work that I'm doing and what it's going to lead to. And so for me, it's incredibly exciting taking each step, knowing that by taking the step that I'm going to today, it's going to get us that much closer. And so, to give you an example, I guess I'd wake up and first thing I do is open up my inbox, respond to however many emails I have and get that out of the way. And, we might have some meetings set with some legislators, with their staff, to discuss different things, maybe bills that they've introduced, or maybe we're going to have conversations about bills that they don't plan to introduce, and understanding why that is and why they're not going to be introducing a menstrual equity bill this session. And after those meetings, we typically meet as a team once or twice a week, go over our plan for the week, for the month, and then overall kind of our goals. And after that, it's a little bit more of responding to some emails. And then my favorite part of the day is when I meet with youth organizers and youth advocates on this issue and discuss what they can do to really make a change in their communities as well. And typically I have one or two of those meetings every day, and those typically end up being the best part.
Would you be able to describe the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on these ways of helping solving and achieving period equity?
Sure. So COVID-19 has had a drastic impact on period poverty. It's truly exacerbated the issue. What we've seen is that period poverty has only increased through COVID-19. The lack of access to menstrual products has decreased through this pandemic. The reason being is lots of folks don't have access to these products on a day-to-day basis at home for a number of reasons. And so they rely on the institutions that they work in. They rely on the institutions that they study in and all these different places that they go to every single day in order to get their products. And so when we had the shutdowns, when everyone was stuck at home, lots of these same people were still not able to purchase these products. They still didn't have access to these products. And so that was a struggle for a lot of folks. That's first. Second, a lot of some things that we saw during the pandemic is buying essential products in bulk, right? And so I think the number one thing that we saw was, for some odd reason, I still don't understand why, but everyone was buying
Yes,
toilet paper.
yes,
I
I
don't
remember.
get it. I still don't know why we did that or why that was a thing. But it wasn't just toilet paper. We heard from a lot of people, and we saw personally, each of us, when you'd walk down the aisle looking for menstrual products, a lot of those shelves were empty and they weren't being stocked nearly enough. We saw that there was a number of issues with with the industry in general in producing menstrual products due to a number of reasons that were caused by the shutdowns of COVID-19. And so COVID-19 really exacerbated the issue of period poverty. Something that we saw that was great from youth activists is that we had a number of organizers and activists who worked on speaking with their school administrations. And given that school was going to be shut down, what they did is they went through each and every restroom in that school and collected the menstrual products that were not going to be used because no one was going to be there, and they donated those menstrual products to community pantries, to families in need during the pandemic. So that was really cool to see. That was one small way that some of these organizers were able to have an impact on their communities through this time. It was a difficult time, so anything really could help. So COVID-19 really did affect lots of people within the space, within period poverty, and it really, really exacerbated the issue. And we saw that on a number of levels.
Thank you. Why is it especially important for people who do not menstruate to care about and be present in the menstrual movement?
Well, there's tons of reasons for why it's important for folks who don't menstruate to care about period poverty. One of which I think is a very general reason, is that if we as a society only care about the issues that personally affect us, we are not going to move forward as a society. We are not going to move forward as a human race. We wouldn't move forward as a world in any aspect. And so it's important to understand that the issues that affect you or the issues that may not affect you are still going to have an impact on people in your community, are still going to have an impact on the society that you live in. And so by solving these problems, you're going to be putting your community, you're going to be putting society in a better position to progress. And so that is, just one example that I like to give people without even getting too deep into the reasoning. And the reason being is I see a lot of folks who don't menstruate respond well to that. And so I typically go with that answer. But also, something that we've seen quite a bit is the patriarchy has had quite the effect in exacerbating the issue of period poverty as well. And that's directly correlated and connected to the stigma around menstruation and periods. And so in any issue, it's difficult for one group of people to completely eradicate it. You're going to need a number of different communities, people, a really diverse coalition, if you will. And it's the same thing here. The menstrual equity space is no different. Period poverty is no different. And so we need all types of people from the Black community, people from the Muslim community, people from whichever community, people from who menstruate, people who don't menstruate. It's a diverse rainbow coalition that needs to come together in order to combat this issue, because this is not an issue that affects one race, one religion, or one type of people. It really has an impact on a number of folks from all different cultures and backgrounds and religions, and even even in the financial aspect of things. Another thing that we see is that period poverty is also uh, at the intersection of a number of issues. Period poverty is at the intersection of racial justice. It's at the intersection of economic justice. And so in order to have an impact on racial justice and have an impact on economic justice, one thing that we can do, one thing that we can fight for is menstrual equity. And so if you're someone who cares about all these other issues, you have to also care about period poverty and combating period poverty.
Thank you. And to piggyback off of that question, how can, I don't want to say incentivize, but how can we motivate people who don't menstruate to join the menstrual movement?
Well, to answer that question, we have to understand what is the reasoning behind them not supporting this issue. And the answer to that is the stigma around menstruation, around periods. And so the number one way to get more people involved, whether they menstruate or not, is to combat the period stigma. And we do that through having conversations. We do that through normalizing periods. We do that through normalizing the whole conversation around menstruation and how menstruation is the essence of life, allowing people to understand that, giving them the space to talk about it, giving them the space to ask these questions. Unfortunately, we see in a lot of these schools that even in sex ed, a lot of people don't talk about menstruation. So the group of boys, the group of people who don't menstruate will sit in sex ed and they won't hear about menstruation. I graduated with a degree in biology in my undergrad. I never took anything, a class, a chapter, a section on menstruation.
Wow.
I took a number of anatomy classes. We worked on cadavers. We did all types of things with the human anatomy and the human body. And not once did any of my classes ever mention menstruation. And everything from human anatomy to microbiology, there wasn't a course, a chapter. And so that in and of itself tells you that we need to include this topic within our education system. And by doing so, we're going to be better equipped to combat the period stigma. And once we combat the period stigma, I have no doubt more people will get involved.
Thank you. Why is it important for young people, especially those involved in the menstrual movement, to know about our government and legislature?
That's a great question. So this is the world that I live in. To me, the way we are going to end period poverty is through passing policy. And so for people within this space, for organizers, for advocates, for youth organizers and youth advocates, for young people in general, what we need to understand is that in order for us to make a change, we need to do two things. First and foremost, we need to elect people to office who represent our values and understand the issues that we care for. That's first. Second, once these people are in office, we need to pressure these people who are in office to pass legislation that's going to support the issues we care for. And the way we do that is twofold. Again, first, we register to vote once we're at that age and able to do so. Registering to vote is incredibly important. And if you're not able to register to vote at this time, then register your family to vote. Register your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your uncle, cousin, whoever it is, your friends who are old enough to vote, you should register them. Once they're registered, it's understanding the people who are running and supporting those people who are running who represent your values, so that you have someone in Congress who can be a champion for the issues you care about. And like I said, once they are in Congress, once they are in city council, once they are in, the school, on the school board, that's when we have those conversations with these people and say, hey, these are the issues I care about. Passing menstrual equity, bills for menstrual equity, combating period poverty is at the top of our list, and we need you to take action. And that's when organizing comes in. It's pressuring those legislators, making sure that they better understand the issue, because the matter of fact is a lot of them don't. And so there's a role for education here that you may need to educate people. But what it comes down to is that policy is going to be the way for us to end this issue, because it really is through enforcing some of these bills that we're going to be able to end period poverty and further menstrual equity. You know, some of these states, they pass policy, but the bills are not enforced, they're not implemented. And so that really nullifies the bill. There's no use in passing the bill if we're not going to really push it forward and implement the changes that it was seeking to make. And so understanding that it's through policy that we're going to make the change, that it is the law that's going to help us in combating this issue, is going to be key in the work that we do.
Yeah. And I think this is especially an important question because I have so many conversations with other teenagers who say, I'm not 18, so why should I care?
Mhm.
And I think that's, as you mentioned, a really bad attitude to have because we always have the power to be influential. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, what responsibility or duty does the government play in helping end period poverty? Why should it care?
Like I said, the role of the government within this issue is to help, take this load off of its citizens, right? To help solve the issues that its citizens are facing day in and day out. Period poverty is one of those issues. There is no reason that in this day and age, we should still have people across the country and all over the world who are still suffering from the lack of access to menstrual products, from the lack of access to period products. These items should be and could be made incredibly accessible to everyone who needs them. And so our government plays an incredibly important role here through their power to pass policy and to pass and implement legislation. And so we have bills in Congress right now, like the Menstrual Equity for All Act. This is a bill that Representative Grace Ming from New York has been introducing every single year for the last 5 to 6 years easily. And every year the bill fails. The reason being is, unfortunately, we're not seeing enough support on it. And what's the reason behind that? I point directly towards stigma, the stigma around menstruation. And that's leading to a lack of conversation on the issue. That's leading to people thinking it's not important. The patriarchy also plays an important role there. And so there's a lot that our government must do. But even though I believe it's not our fault, the fault of youth organizers and youth advocates, that this is still an issue, it is our responsibility to do everything we can to make sure that our government is playing a key role in solving this issue. And sometimes that looks like registering people to vote, like we said. Sometimes that looks like having conversations with legislators, sitting with their staff members and educating them on this issue. Many of them don't understand this. Many of them come from different cultures and different backgrounds, grew up in different environments. And so I don't blame people for the environments they grew up in or the backgrounds they have, but the issue comes in when they're not willing to listen. From my experiences, many of them are willing to listen. We just need to be able to take that first step forward and have that conversation with them and educate them on this issue. And I think by doing that, we'll grow the movement of legislators and policymakers who understand this issue and stand on our side. Our government plays an incredibly important role here, but so do we as youth organizers and youth advocates.
How has creativity been a tool in solving some of these complex or challenging problems?
Creativity has been incredibly important here. You know, it's really about finding whatever form, whatever means are necessary, going through anything that we have to do in order to get the point across. And sometimes that's in the form of memes. Sometimes that's in the form of TikTok. Sometimes that's through a boring, 5-minute video explaining the issue. It's really understanding each and every different group of people and really figuring out, well, what would they be willing to listen to, read, or watch, or help them? How are we going to help them understand this issue? And so that's where creativity comes in, and being creative and finding really the best platform and the best way to reach an audience. And like I said, there's a number of different ways we can do that. But creativity is going to be important really in a number of different spaces and combating a lot of these different issues that we're facing across not only the country, but the world in general. I mean, look at the climate change movement. They've done an incredible job in being incredibly, just really, really creative in getting the word out on the issue that they care for. And similarly here within the menstrual equity space, a lot of young folks have been very creative and teaching people, finding ways to teach people about period poverty and how we can further menstrual equity. And so creativity really does play an important role.
Thank you. So our next question was, how can young people get involved? But I will augment that because that is something you've done a wonderful job of talking about through this entire episode. So
Thank you.
what I will say is, what are some resources, or do you have action items, people or places to reach out to that people can jot this down and be like, I'm going to contact this organization to get involved?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, um, an easy one to go to, an easy way for young people to learn more about this issue and for young people to get more involved is go to period.org. At period.org, we have a number of resources there where you can learn more about period poverty, where you can learn more about furthering menstrual equity, where you can get involved in policy and advocacy, no matter how old or young you are. There's a lot of resources there and a lot of folks that you can connect with to do so. So we'd be happy to help you. Just feel free to reach out.
Any other places?
There's a number, I'm sure there's a number of other organizations who do some incredible work. Another place you can learn more about this issue, if you go to the Alliance for Period Supplies, they are a great resources. They donate menstrual products all across the country. And so even visiting their page, you'll learn a lot about this issue and a lot about what you can do to better solve this problem.
And now I'll turn the conversation to you. What is something you wish you knew about menstruation when growing up?
Something I wish that I knew about menstruation growing up was that it was the essence of life. That was never explained to me at a young age, right? That's not something I learned about in school or even at home, frankly, for that matter. But understanding how important menstruation is to life in general, I think it shifts perspective and allows people to really break down the stigma and understand, well, this is number one, a normal bodily function, and number two, an important part of life. So there's no reason for it to be so stigmatized and for it to be so hush hush. And so I believe that gives people a broad perspective on what menstruation is and what periods are, and that would help support in combating period poverty.
And this is a word that has frequented our conversation today, so it's like you've been reading our minds. But what does the word stigma mean to you?
Well, the word stigma, what I've really come to see it as is a barrier more than anything else. Um, the stigma around menstruation has really built this wall around the movement and really stopped us from reaching out to all these different spaces and reaching out to all these different people because for some reason, talking about periods is seen as taboo. And that's exactly what the stigma is. It's created this taboo culture, this barrier around solving the problem. But I don't really worry much about it because we have youth organizers like yourself, youth advocates like yourself, who are kicking the door down and making sure that we break down that stigma and break that taboo so we can solve this issue.
As we hit question 14, to lighten the mood, we will ask, do you have any particularly entertaining life stories in this space?
Interesting life stories, not many. One time I will say, I mean, this is not that interesting, but one time I will say I was at the library at the Ohio State University. I was studying for an exam and I wanted to go to the restroom. I walk in the restroom and I see this thing on the wall. I don't even know what it is. And I just walk up to it. And I'm like, I'm just looking at this. It's just this gray silver box on the wall. I'm like, what is that? And I don't even know what's going on. I'm just, oh, whatever. Okay. And I look around in the bathroom and it's kind of weird looking because there's no urinals or anything. And it just clicks in my mind that I'm in the women's restroom, which thank God no one was in there. Like I walked out and thankfully no one was around because it was late at night. It was probably around 1 a.m. or something. And it was like my heart was racing. So I was like, oh my God, I totally just walked in the women's restroom. but that was the first time I had ever seen a menstrual product dispenser, and I didn't even know what the hell it was. And it's funny because I work within the space
Yeah.
every day, and it didn't come to my mind mainly because I thought I was in the men's restroom.
Yeah.
Uh, but for a second there, I was just like, wait, what is going on here? Where am I? But thankfully, no one was there. No one was around. But yeah, I was a little lost there for a quick second. So I
Oh
mean, there's
my.
that.
And our last question will be, what are your words of wisdom to anybody listening in?
Well, I can't give anyone words of wisdom, but what I can say is this: if there's an issue that you care about, might it be menstrual equity, might it be fighting for against climate change, no matter what it is, I can guarantee you that your voice is more impactful than you know. I work with youth organizers and advocates. I've been a youth organizer. Uh, I've seen the change that we can make when we are consistent and continue to persevere. That's what it's all about, perseverance. Because a lot of these issues, there are a lot of forces behind the reason why these issues are happening. And if we are not as consistent in working to end these crises, if we are not as consistent and perseverant as these larger forces, then we're going to have a larger problem on our hand, and we're not necessarily going to be able to solve the problem. And so, what I will tell people is continue to push for the issues that you care for, continue to push for the solutions that you care for, go in with an open mind, and take every step forward that you can get. Because I guarantee you, if you continue to do that, then you'll get the solution that you're looking for.